everyone, and welcome to Movers in Our Orbit, a podcast series from Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Tamara Bond-Williams, Executive Director of SSPI. The Better Satellite World podcast, the Space and Satellite Futures podcast, which includes Movers in Our Orbit, and She Reaches, are all made possible by the support of SSPI's corporate partners, Access Intelligence, producers of the Satellite Conference and Via Satellite Magazine, the law firm of Clyde and Company, Hughes and EchoStar Company, QVIA, and the American Space Exploration Fund. These partners, along with SSPI's global membership, help us champion the technologies and professionals that make a better world through space and satellites. It's not often that we rebroadcast podcast episodes, especially in the Movers in Our Orbit series. But then again, it's not often that we have such fast movers in our orbit. Today, we revisit our conversation with former Promise awardee Kelsey Doerksen, who recently submitted her PhD thesis and secured not one, but two new roles. First, she's doing a postdoctoral AI research at Arizona State University School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence. And second, she'll lead the agricultural impasse risk research at University of Cape Town, African Climate and Development Initiative. Wow! Go, Kelsey! Kelsey began her career at Planet, where she helped operate the world's largest Earth observation constellation. And since then, she's worked at the intersection of AI, Earth observation, and humanitarian applications, developing tools for disaster response, environmental monitoring, and connectivity initiatives. Tune in to her previous episode. We invite you to get to know her. Kelsey, welcome again to Movers in Our Orbit.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before I go any further, Kelsey, you've done so much. I did my very best to truncate that. Did I get any of that wrong?
The only change would be my new role at UNICEF is I'm a data scientist in the climate and environment team. So instead of Giga, I'm on the climate and environment team, but this is quite new.
Got it. Okay. Well, we're going to dig into that in just a moment. But let me start with your current status as a PhD student. The reason why I suddenly was like, oh my gosh, I have to talk to Kelsey is because at Oxford, where you're studying your PhD, you wind up having your portrait hung at Keble Hall. So tell me a little bit about that. I thought that meant that you had graduated. Apparently not so much. How come that happened? What did that mean for you? Tell me more.
Yeah, definitely. I, first of all, never expected in a million years my portrait would be hung in Oxford. But so essentially the college I'm a part of is called Keble College. And every 2 years or so, they have a series, what they call Portraits of Keble. And 20 to 28 people are essentially selected or nominated from the community, whether that be alumni, I think it's majority alumni, staff, but also a few current students as well, nominated for essentially their contributions to the Oxford community, but also the global stage. So I was nominated from a peer of mine based on my research work, but also my kind of outreach work that I do in the women in STEM community, and broadly speaking, my research on AI for social good. So my portrait is officially hung in Keble for the next 2 years. So if anyone's in Oxford and wants to check it out, it'll be there.
That's fantastic. And I have to say, you never expected it in your wildest years, but had I known that such a thing was possible, I would have expected it. So there is a reason why you became a Promise awardee here at SSPI. So speaking of which, when we first met you and we honored you as a Promise awardee, you were still working with Planet. But much of your work since then has been around artificial intelligence or AI. And so I have a couple of questions. First one is, were you working with artificial intelligence at Planet? And I just didn't, I somehow missed that. But also, what has been your journey in AI and what initially drew you to that field? And how have you gone from aerospace engineering and satellite operations into the AI field?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did a little bit of AI at Planet when I was in satellite operations, but nothing too extreme. It was more sort of a research initiative from a few members of the SatOps team, which was looking at how we could use spacecraft telemetry. We have, of course, a number of satellites. There was 100 to 200 plus satellites in orbit, downlinking a large amount of data every day. You know, every downlink is almost on the order of 20 to 60 gigabytes. So we were using that data with AI models, pretty simple machine learning models, to see if we could help with automatic anomaly detection. That was more so as a kind of research project, but we did implement it to kind of help us target what satellites were having issues and, you know, what was their likely cause, to help with triaging. My sort of introduction into AI began a little before that. So during my master's in computer engineering, I did an internship at the Paris Observatory in France, and I was researching how solar flares impact satellite orbits. So this was right before I actually became a satellite operator myself. And in that role, we had enormous amounts of data to parse through, and it became sort of the perfect application to use AI to predict solar flares and coronal mass ejections. And then having a background in aerospace engineering was extremely useful for this work because I understood fundamentally how satellite orbits work and could apply that directly to our analysis. And it was from that internship and my master's, I think, which really got me the job at Planet itself. And then my journey into AI really began essentially because I'm very interested in data analysis. And, you know, as a satellite operator, we're parsing through tons and tons of telemetry every day. A lot of my work was to create metrics and information about the health and productivity of the satellites themselves. So I really got to dig into the data, but I never really got to touch the imagery part of the satellite operations and the data that was generated from Planet's super doves. And so I was really interested in seeing, you know, how can that data be used with AI, or in particular, I'm interested in climate and humanitarian applications. But it was really just, I'm a big data nerd. I love software engineering. I think it's really cool and really interesting. And I wanted to kind of pursue that at a PhD level to within the Earth observation context.
Well, okay. So all of that just raised at least 10 more questions for me. We don't have time for all of that. But let me just ask, you used the term data and you're a data nerd. And as I was listening to you, I was just thinking about what is the data, right? Planets up there observing the Earth from space. But that's not the only data, right? You're talking about the situation of each individual satellite, their relationship to what's around them, what's happening in their environment. All of that counts as data. And then there's the actual images that it's capturing. That's a lot of information. And so I can see how AI is what you use to crunch the data, but you said that you weren't actually looking at the images. So how did you figure out how to understand if the data was correct? How do you process that information given the vastness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of the times as well in applied AI contexts, a lot of the work that you do as a AI engineer, as a machine learning researcher myself, is data cleaning, understanding the data itself, understanding what is, you know, normal distribution in a data set, or what's kind of data that we expect to see. For example, for when we think back to satellite operations, we have these normal ranges of battery voltage on a satellite, or solar panel energy consumption, these types of things. So it's really, a lot of it goes back to actually understanding fundamentally what our normal range is, so that we can then use AI to learn what is abnormal and what is an anomaly on board a spacecraft itself. But a lot of it comes down to data cleaning. I do a lot of that now in my work using Earth observation images, but also if I'm using other measurements from satellites, be that temperature, you know, surface pressure, these types of things. So yeah, a lot of my work is also parsing through data and actually fundamentally understanding what does, quote, normal data look like from this satellite or from this particular target that I'm trying to predict.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, so you started out your professional life at Planet, and Planet has a very specific mission, right? They're out there using satellites for good, and they have a business model around being useful, right? Being useful in space to those of us on Earth. And so, did that experience shape your inclination towards using technology and AI for humanitarian purposes? And tell me a little bit more about how you got to be this. Maybe you were just born that way. Were you just born a humanitarian?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I always knew that I wanted to pursue a PhD because I'm just passionate about learning. And honestly, I wanted to be an astronaut. Well, I still want to be an astronaut. And I figured they have PhDs, so I need to get one. I decided that when I was like 10.
Wow.
But I always knew I wanted to do a PhD, but I wasn't sure. Wasn't really as particularly passionate about a certain specific subject to actually push myself to pursue the degree, really until I started working in the field of Earth observation and at Planet itself. I loved my job at Planet because I felt like I could truly make a positive impact with my work, and it was really fulfilling in satellite ops to create the data that was used for the variety of downstream tasks that they use it for, like climate monitoring, disaster management. For me, I've always loved space, but I felt sort of a calling for work that's more directly impactful to our society, which is why I think Earth observation was ultimately the perfect field for me. I debated for a long time before I started my master's, actually, if I should go to medical school or kind of focus my efforts into the aerospace field, because I was worried if I wasn't maybe like a medical doctor, perhaps I wouldn't feel that sort of impact on humanity. But really, yeah, Earth observation, I feel like, was the field for me. And as I spent my time at Planet and learned about the variety of downstream tasks and the users of our data, it really drew me to pursue a PhD program where I can then be sort of the user and go to that downstream task and be the person building the tools using the data for social good, and kind of the other end of the Earth observation pipeline, where I started with being the person that's creating the data, and now I'm on the other end, being the person that's actually using the data itself.
So you're using the data with some of the organizations that you're working with now, like UNICEF. And you told me, and I've already forgot the organization where you're at right now in Cape Town. How do they approach using AI that's different from, say, in a commercial setting?
Yeah, what's been really interesting, particularly with my work with UNICEF, is their approach to engaging local communities in the development of this tech, which I think can sometimes be missing, particularly at a PhD level. You're trying to get your thesis done. You're less so, you can't have your hands in every single area of the research. You really kind of have to focus on a particular task and become an expert in that. And when you're working on big teams or with these massive, extremely well-respected institutions, they're leaders in these fields for a reason. It's really amazing to see how they engage local stakeholders, country offices, for example, with UNICEF, to really understand what the needs of the user are, and also, what are the barriers to actually using this tech. I think that's one of the biggest things that often gets forgotten about when we're developing, particularly, I think, in a research context, when we're developing these AI tools and these really highly technical solutions to problems, is how is the user that might not have the same technical competency or resources that you do, how are they going to actually use the tool? So this is one of the things that we've been thinking about as well for the landslide forecasting project I've been working on for the past few years. Is, we've built this tool and it's ingesting data and it's running on the cloud, but how can someone on the ground in Nepal, which is where our project is focused on, use this tool in a way that the result is going to be easily digestible and they can make informed decisions from our solution? So I think that's something that's really interesting about the UN and UNICEF in particular, is there's such a high level of engagement with the users at such a large variety of economic background, right? Where I'm mostly focused on work in the global South, which of course doesn't have the same resources as North America and Europe. So it's really imperative to keep this line of communication open with the stakeholders in the local communities that we're trying to serve, that I think is often lost in other companies.
You are listening to The Better Satellite World, the longest running continuous podcast in the commercial space and satellite industry. The Better Satellite World podcast is funded by the corporate partners of SSPI. Hughes, Axis Intelligence, the American Space Exploration Fund, and Cuvia. Have you heard about SBQ? Space Business Qualified is a popular online learning program for industry professionals designed by GeoAI, SSPI, and SatProf. To learn more, visit spacebq.org. In November, join Tamara, Space News Magazine, and the New York Space Alliance for the next New York Space Business Roundtable. If you want to get inside the industry's biggest issues and investments, meet startups and high-profile industry leaders from around the world, the Roundtable is the real New York event you cannot miss. To register, visit sspi.org/events. And now back to the Better Satellite World.
Yeah, you know what that brings up for me is the idea of cultural nuance, right? It's one of the criticisms that comes at AI in particular, or AI applications in particular, is that the cultures that are producing artificial intelligence are one thing, but human cultures are much more varied than what the culture that produces and trains AI. And so the use cases may not always fit a particular cultural construct. And you were mentioning that your project right now is in Nepal, and you want the people there who the tool is intended to help, you want them to be able to adopt the solution and apply it. But have you run into situations where maybe their application is very different than what you went in expecting?
I think this happens all the time. Yeah, definitely. Actually, it reminds me of the work I was doing with the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. I was a part of the team called Scientific Understanding from Data Science. Mm-hmm. So a little different from the community stakeholders in Nepal, but I think it's still quite related in that we were working on a team of physical scientists from more the atmospheric science background, pure scientists in that field, and machine learning engineers that effectively have no knowledge of the domain that they're trying to work in. So I was on the machine learning side. We're working with the science side, and genuinely, it took months to actually even find the language, the shared language between these two kind of very distinct domains to figure out what we actually want to get out of the project. So for us, we were trying to improve climate models or understand what are the main drivers of errors in climate models. And when you heard that sentence, maybe it doesn't sound too convoluted, but even the language and terminology between the two communities are so vastly different that it really just takes like sitting in a room and discussing, piece by piece what you're trying to achieve and what perhaps AI can and also can't do. That I think is really critical for any project, kind of regardless of the application. I think because AI is obviously a very hyped term at the minute. Everyone wants to use AI for a variety of things. But I think it's often not discussed, what are actually the limitations of this tech and can it solve the problem we're trying to solve? And also, is it even the best tool for the problem we're trying to solve? So synthesizing that, I think, is challenging in any project, and definitely learned a lot of that from this particular project with JPL.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, I was talking about diversity of human cultures, but even that diversity is within a single culture, right? This is, Western scientific world, and yet there's so many striations of diversity even within that. And I find the issue of human diversity to be fascinating, just because there's so much learning to be had from our diversity, and I think it's actually pretty important to make sure that we're aware of it and capturing that. So thank you for that. So speaking on that, you've also emphasized the importance of ethical AI and conscious consumption of AI technology. So I think you've leaned into that a little bit, just in terms of being aware of what AI can and cannot do. But what else do you mean by that? And what are some practical ways for those of us in the general public to become more informed and engaged AI users?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched on previously about how the development of this tech of AI is really from a quite, this is generally speaking, but quite a homogenous group, I would say, is the majority of the people that are building this tech. Mm-hmm. And so when, these AI tools are being used and deployed for the entire world to use, and the entire world doesn't exactly look like a lot of the boardrooms that maybe these massive tech companies have, or the people that are in those rooms making those decisions, how is that going to impact us, right? So I think one of the biggest things that I try to tell people in my life is to just think critically about the tech you're using and ask questions about it, and don't take everything as at face value. I mean, everyone has, you heard the old term of your parents saying, don't believe everything you see on TV. And I think that still honestly goes for don't believe everything you hear or read out of a chatbot, out of a LLM or large language model. I think thinking critically about, where is this information coming from, and is there any bias in the information that's being given to me or the solution that's being given to me? AI is touching all facets of our lives to the point we don't even think about or realize we're using it, like when we're, using Google Maps or other different types of tools, autocomplete on our emails now, to the point of, we don't even have to think about our sentences when we're trying to respond to an email quickly. So I think it's just important to kind of ask questions and think critically about the technology you're using, and also do due diligence in terms of if you're asking a question about a specific research paper or something like that to AI chatbot. We know already that there's been cases where there are fake resources or made up references or made up books and made up authors that are being cited by these AI chatbots. So it's important to kind of think critically, use multiple sources, these types of things. One thing I'm particularly passionate about is, we think about these models being built, these big AI models being built by really hyper intelligent Silicon Valley giants, but ultimately these AI models don't exist without data and good data. And a lot of this labeled data is labeled by people that are grossly underpaid, a lot of them in the global South. And so, when we're thinking about how these models are like incredible and amazing and benefiting our everyday society, who is it benefiting and who is it actually harming in the development? So I think just being conscious of these types of things is really important as a user, as AI technologies just continues to grow and more products are coming out. It seems every single day. It's hard to keep up.
Yeah, you just used a term, or maybe I misheard you. I think you just said in the global South, which I think is a fascinating term. Tell me a little bit more about what that means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, the global South refers to the southern portion of the world. So South America, the continent of Africa. There's a lot of work being done, a lot of low paid work where I think it's actually very highly valued work being done by data workers and data labelers in those communities that are effectively essential for these AI models to exist at all. So it's really important that AI models have labeled data, especially for like large language models. So we don't have models telling you, or your AI chatbot telling you something, really horrible or outputting a racist or sexist remark. So we need to be able to teach the model how to identify what is a bad thing to say, what's a good thing to say. And that comes down to content moderators and data labelers. And a lot of that work is outsourced to communities in the global South, and it's outsourced a lot of the times because it can be cheaper for these companies to do rather than paying someone in North America to do it. So one of the initiatives, I'm personally not a part of it, but I really admire what they do. It's called the Data Workers Inquiry. It's a community-based research project in which data workers lead their own inquiry into their respective workplaces, essentially to support best practices, particularly in these regions of the world. So it's some really incredible work that they do in that. But I think it's just something important that people don't think about when they're engaging with this technology, that, where does this data actually come from and how are these models actually built? And it's not just, software engineers in San Francisco. It's honestly a global initiative to get these tools off the ground.
Wow. Yeah, okay, so gosh, okay, I now understand that you said global south and we just have different accents. Okay, got it. But I didn't know that the work that you described as data labeling, which I assume is also part of making sure that the data is actually good data, which you already described at the beginning as essential. I didn't know that that was being outsourced to the Southern Hemisphere that way. So that's interesting to know, and it raises a question because when you mentioned that, what was coming up for me was how much autonomy do they have in their expression of tagging, right? Like, how much judgment do they get to apply, or is this just, here's how we want you to do things? And I asked the question because the fact that a lot of the information is being processed in the Southern Hemisphere could have an impact, maybe more positive than negative, on the shape of the data when so much of the data is being created in the Northern Hemisphere. Like it might create a balance, but that could only happen if the workers in the South actually have some degree of agency in terms of what they're doing with this data.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of really detailed and fantastic use cases or case studies rather on the data workers inquiry page itself that detail actually the challenges that data annotators and data labelers face because there's a lack of training for what they're supposed to be labeling or the quality that's expected of the labelers that might not have the specific expertise that maybe the company that's outsourcing the data to them is for. So it's really interesting. I won't reiterate all of it here, but there's a particularly great report that I read on examining challenges faced by Syrian refugees working as data annotators that I would highly recommend checking out. But this is a huge problem, right? How can we ensure that the quality of the data and what the labels are correct? And this is, I think, a big challenge just in fundamental AI research in and of itself is working with, and especially actually going back to the Earth observation field, we don't have a lot of labels for the data that we're trying to train our models on in the global south for things like weather monitoring or climate change monitoring. So it's a massive challenge. And I think there's a lot of work that's being done in the area of trying to train models on very little data in general, but also on data where there might be low quality of labels. But yeah, would definitely encourage folks to check out the data workers inquiry to see some of those use cases and the challenges faced by those communities in particular.
Thank you for that. Okay, well, let me close with this. You started out by saying that at ripe old age of 10, you decided you wanted to be an astronaut and had mapped it out in your brain. Okay, I need a PhD. I need to go all the way with my education so that I can be an astronaut. And then I heard you say, it was a throwaway line, but I heard it, still want to be an astronaut. What's the trajectory?
Yeah, no, I did say that. I do still definitely want to be an astronaut. I think for me, I used to be very focused on, I will be happy when insert, I want to become an astronaut. Now, so as I've gotten older, life is more than just your career. You have friends and family, loved ones, things like this that are also very important parts of life. So I'm still want to be an astronaut, but I take out that I will be happy when part. And more so, I'm just trying to find work that I find meaningful and that I find, passion in and that's impactful. I met Chris Hadfield once at a book signing, and I asked him, what is your advice? This is when I was in aerospace engineering undergrad, and I asked him, what's your advice for, I want to be an astronaut really bad, and what should I do? Should I, become a private pilot, and should I do X, Y, Z? And he said to me, the biggest thing is you should just do what you enjoy, because ultimately it's already obviously a very difficult job or role to get to become an astronaut. It involves a lot of skill and effort, but also luck. And you can't control all of these factors in your life, even though you might try. But the most important thing is you find, happiness and fulfillment in what you're doing. And so that's kind of my trajectory for me. I mean, I still love space. I think space technology is incredible. I still cry every time I see a space launch or landing from, the booster stages, these types of things. It's very incredible to see. But ultimately, I'm really just trying to positively impact the world in the little time that I have on Earth. And if that means I get to become an astronaut, amazing. And if not, I think there's other ways that I can still positively impact humanity using space technology.
Yeah. Kelsey, you are already doing it. So congratulations and thank you so much for being here. As I said at the top, Kelsey, none of us at SSPI are surprised at your amazing trajectory of success. We are extraordinarily proud of you. And so congratulations and best wishes for more exciting things to come.
Thank you so much.
That concludes today's episode of Movers in Our Orbit featuring Kelsey Doerksen. A huge thank you to Kelsey for sharing her insights on AI, satellites, and technology for humanitarian impact. This podcast is made possible by the support of SSPI's professional, student, and corporate members. We are especially grateful for corporate partners Access Intelligence, producers of Via Satellite Magazine, Hughes, an EchoStar company, and the American Space Exploration Fund, formerly known as the Space Shuttle Children's Trust Fund. To learn more about SSPI, visit sspi.org and follow us on X at SSPI. You can follow us as well on LinkedIn and Facebook. The SSPI podcast series, including the Better Satellite World podcast, the Making Leaders podcast, and SSPI Wise Presents, releases new episodes every Monday. You can subscribe at sspi.org/podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, or really wherever you get your podcasts. Join us next time for another conversation with a space and satellite professional making waves in the industry. And until then, this is Tamara Bond Williams signing off for Movers in Our Orbit.